Good afternoon and welcome to Biztech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by Rajhi Bank Malaysia and broadcasted out of their offices in Kuala Lumpur. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, coming to us out of Singapore. Now, Vishnu, great to have you on the show as always.
Always good to be here, Brian. It's a great way to start the Monday, although today I would say it's probably better to be where you are. Is that for real or a backdrop?
No, actually, that's for real. We're actually broadcasting out of Rajhi Bank's new headquarters or new offices that will also later in the year house their digital bank team. But before we get your insights, Vishnu, let's take a look at how crypto markets are performing. Bitcoin is at 39,138. It's down 1.48%. Ethereum is at 2,866.21. It's down 2.97%. Now it's Anzac Day, long weekend, so Australia and New Zealand markets are closed for a holiday. So we'll start with the SGX. The Straits Times Index is at 3,355.19. It's down 0.18%. The KLSE is at 1,592.7. It's down 0.58%. Shanghai is at 3,008.78. It's down 2.55%. The Nikkei is at 26,614.5. It's down 1.82%. The Hang Seng is at 20,043.75. It's down 2.87%. In fact, during the day, it was down as much as 3%. The Kospi is at 2,664.82. It's down 1.47%. So, Vishnu, what's the reason for the rout this morning?
Of course, there are a few reasons. I mean, some are concerns and ongoing concerns about China, whether there'll be a widening lockdown, whether they'll have a supply chain impact. The Ukraine uncertainty is still there. But I want to, really bring this in and say that a lot of it had to do with the Fed. And down here, we can see why Fed expectations are increasingly beginning to rule the roost. A 50 basis point hike. So this is basically a chart showing us each of the Fed meetings. This is our forecast for rate hikes, but pay no attention to that because you should see what markets are pricing in. Markets are pricing in, as you can see, almost a done deal for 50 basis points back to back for May and June. And then beyond that, there are increasing chances of further 50 basis point hikes. And they're looking at a total of 240 basis points of hikes, which is to say that's almost 25 basis point hikes, of which one has been delivered in March. So with 6 meetings left, markets are looking at as much as 9 more 25 basis point hikes, which means you get really quite a rash of double hikes of 50 basis points. And that's really aggressive. If you look at the chart of where the Fed funds rates will go, our own forecast sees it going up to 1.75 to 2. Markets have it much higher on either side of 2.5%. There are some outliers looking at 3%. Why this is making markets a little bit nervous is because of this particular chart here that tells us quite a bit. The blue line is just inflation expectations. The thing to note is the green line here is 10-year yields. 10-year yields track expectations but tend to overshoot when the Fed is doing aggressive tightening, which is what we expect the Fed to do this time. So that's to say 10-year yields at about 2.8 may look fair, but if there's going to be an overshoot, markets may be fearful that yields could very quickly ride up to about 3.2 to 3.6% at the 10-year. And that's really going to be a drag on markets. I'm just quickly going to say that in the region, if we look at rate hikes, what we can anticipate, well short of the Fed. These are the bars anticipating the hikes for this year. At the most, you're going to get 100 basis points outside of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand and Bank of Korea. Nowhere near the Fed's 200 to 250 basis points, which means all else equal, the Fed will have a policy divergence that makes it less attractive to leave capital in Asia. And let's not even talk about inflation differentials, where if EM Asia's inflation catches up with the US, that also makes real returns less attractive, which means at the margin between now and say Q3, we will get episodic attacks where capital is trying to get out of risk.
And so this is a worry for Asian markets, isn't it? And Asian economies, basically the capital flight out of markets into the US market.
That's correct. And I mean, the way to think about it is at the margin, a US investor now putting money into Asia is getting about 5 percentage points extra of real returns because US inflation is much higher, 8.5%. Asia is around 3 to 3.5%. But that's going to narrow greatly, maybe even equalize over the next 2 quarters. And when that does, that 5 percentage point drops off, and then you've got the
Mhm.
Fed extra 100 basis points compared to the rest of the region. That means 600 basis points of returns, additional returns just drop off like that. And that's really what makes capital flows back into the US a very risky scenario. It's very likely that that risk could play out.
So, speaking of risk, Vishnu, what are some key risks that you are concerned about in markets today?
Well, I think really for us is I want to get more specific about the Fed risk because a lot of people are focusing on the rate hikes. We are more focused on May's balance sheet reduction plans. Because if they go ahead and do that $95 billion per month reduction, that's going to be at 5 times the pace of the last episode of reduction they did in 2017, at least the first 12 months of it. Draining that much liquidity can have a little bit of a shocking impact is on both on asset prices as well as on the funding side of things. Suddenly funding can dry up. So funding is definitely something that's very important to us. The
Okay.
other thing that's important is how China navigates its way out. I mean, it's looking to try to boost the economy going into Q3, Q4 because of the political transition. We think the intentions are there, but we think there's a risk that it may be a little too late. And that may also send through some supply chain shocks and all if we don't get it arrested on time. So these are the two big risks we are watching quite justifiably from the two big economies.
And looking ahead this week and going to a very short term right now, what are some key things that we should be watching out for that will move markets?
Let me start off with the elephant in the room that I forgot to mention, or rather conspicuously didn't mention. The Ukraine risk, of course, it continues to play out. So there are headlines, but I think Ukraine will occupy a very big part of it, mainly because this week Fed speakers are not speaking. It's a blackout period before the next Fed meeting on 4th May. So Fed speakers drop off by the wayside, but then you get Ukraine risks coming up. On the data front, we get uh, the PCE, the private consumption expenditure, the core prices, so on and so forth. This is a wider measure than CPI, something the Fed watches. So these data points will also be very important for markets to watch. All eyes in the region are on the BOJ. Given how much the yen has fallen, they are waiting to
Mhm.
see what the BOJ does, or perhaps what the BOJ doesn't do.
Doesn't do.
These are the things that can really kick up volatility in the region, and these are the big data points we're watching for. Closer to EM Asia, Bank of Korea has got GDP data, and we've got other releases coming out. But I think really these are in the back seat, and BOJ, US PCE, the wider measure of inflation, and Ukraine occupy the headlines alongside China. So those are big things we're watching for.
Now, Vishnu, as always, thank you very much for coming on the show and thank you for your insights.
My pleasure always, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, on Biztech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by Rajhi Bank Malaysia. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as Rajhi Bank's social media platforms. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.